Welcome. Thanks for tuning in. You are listening to Gnostic Studies, and we're going to continue our Gnostic Runology series. Today's rune is the A-Rune, but we're going to do a review of the previous class before we jump into today's material, which is what we usually do so that we can get caught up and kind of jump back into where we left off. So let's do that. In the previous class, we looked at the A-Rune supplement. So when we studied Huiracocha and Samael and Weor, we looked, which are the Gnostic and Rosicrucian elements of the A-Rune, we looked at a concept called the magical self. And what's interesting is if you study Huiracocha's Tarot and Kabbalah book, which is called Gnostic Rosicrucian Runology, or Gnostic Rosicrucian Kabbalah, something like that. At least that's the English name of it, of the book. The English translation. He clearly worked with a tarot that was used by this guy, A. Frank Glan, who in 1920 published a book called the German Tarot Book. Of course, it was 10, 15 years before his Kabbalah class came out, but it's quite interesting to look at the ideas that are in this book and the possibility that this occultist, A. Frank Glan, who wrote one of the few German books on tarot at that time, I think the other one was written by Ernst, Tristan, Kurtzahn, another author that we studied. That some of the concepts that he presents are worthwhile to review and see if maybe they influenced Huiracocha, so that then when he gave his information in Spanish, that was then understood, or there's kind of a thread that passes through. So what did Glan say? Well, at the beginning of the book, because the book is about tarot, but at the beginning he has to talk about occultism for a little bit. So the section's called Magic. And he says, the word magic refers to the existence and the effect of forces which cannot be perceived by the five senses. Since everything happens in time and space, forces must be bound spatially and temporally. Forces must be bound in time and space. They are then in things or tied to them. Therefore, they are also subject to natural laws. The magician knows these forces and knows how to use them consciously. Every human being is unconsciously a magician. However, the word magician is only applied to such persons who direct forces with knowledge and consciousness. Strong willpower is magic. It radiates inadvertently and subdues weakness of will. A woman's charm is also a magic power, as is a man's sexual force. All radiations are magical forces. Even the smell of a flower. Every human being has a magical force within themselves, which is often unknown to them. It's called the magical self. And it can be made effective by the knower. Remember, the Greek word for knower is a Gnostic. Or Greek word for knowledge is gnosis. So there is magic in every sound, in every consciously transmitted word. The persuasive speaker magically captivates the listeners. A prayer transmitted with full soul force is a magical force that has been put into effect. Likewise, a curse hurled with will and consciousness is a force set into motion, which quite often flies back upon the Ishwar like a boomerang, and they end up striking themselves. All soul forces are components of the magical self. So he said that every human being has a magical force within themselves, called the magical self, and then he says soul forces are components of that magical self. So he's kind of systematically trying to define things. Now, natural forces outside of the human being differ from those inside, and thus there is a need to differentiate the magician of natural forces from the magician of their own soul force. So he's saying there's natural magic, and then there's what he's calling soul force magic. The real magician is the one who works with soul forces. They use their own person as a deposit or as a pledge. All magically applied soul forces have an effect which returns to the mover. Every human being is able to objectify the soul forces, to split or branch them off. In the German tarot book, such magical forces are mentioned and their training is taught in certain highly spiritual areas. So we know that Huiracocha's course on Tarot and Kabbalah has a mention of Glann's German tarot. The concept of the magical being employed by Huiracocha in his lesson on the A-Rune seems to have been influenced by Glann. Let's look at this. So this is now Huiracocha. He says, this rune is the human magician, the magical being, the willpower being, the telema being, the capable being. The human being is then the magician, the one who knows how to manage their inner powers. The human being is a living rune, perched vertically on the earth like a king or queen and the Lord. In this rune position, one is an accumulator and an antenna of the cosmic forces, as we've learned in the zodiacal course. The point is to do this rune and to consciously personify it. This is how the human being becomes a true magician. I'll read to you again. The point is to do this rune and to consciously personify it. This is how the human being becomes a true magician. Do not forget that this antenna can attract good and bad waves in the same position, and you have to remain with complete attention in order to always reject the bad ones and learn how to only receive the good ones for ourselves and our fellow human beings. In vocalization, the long course, we have learned that the vowels correspond to certain parts of the body, and that I, or E, which is the tone of this rune, has to resound and has its resonance from the feet to the head. The human being in this rune is the connection between Earth and the cosmos, between the terrestrial forces and God. Schopenhauer placed the will in the center of all, and thus this rune also represents willpower, but willpower as movement, that is to say, of moving without being moved. And in this lies the great secret. So what did he say about movement here? Such magical forces are mentioned in their training. I thought he said something about movement. Returns to the mover. Implying that the magician is a mover. If the only true human being is the one who is a magician, then this means that others are not complete, that they lack something. What they lack is willpower, knowing how to will. In this is the key, and all the symbols thus teach it. Real human beings, god men and god women of the A-Rune are required. So what we're submitting to you is that he's building off of this concept of the magical self and off of these ideas of willpower and magic going together that were from this other guy. I mean, he's not the only one to say this, obviously. There's many others that do, but in terms of a German context. And then, what we noticed also was in a book called Treatise of Occult and Practical Magic, sometimes translated as Treatise of Esoteric and Practical Medicine. Samael and Weor says in the section Occult Works with Our Neighbors, he gives another interesting explanation. He says, occult works with our neighbors are performed with the genie from the stars, with the elementals of nature, and with the magical self. The magical self is the intimus, the inner being. For example, if we want to join an enamored couple in wedlock, then we must beg our intimus, our inner being, so that he in his turn will beg Uriel. If Uriel allows this petition, then we will work with Uriel and with the elementals from nature. Yet if the petition to this genie from Venus is not accepted, then we have no other choice but to prostrate ourselves before the verdict of the law, because the law must not be violated. No white magician violates the law. Whosoever performs magical works without the permission of their intimus or inner being, and against the will of the divine hierarchies, is a black magician who will pay their karma within the abyss. So the reason that we must not violate the law is because we incur a karma when we do that. And then that karma can be problematic for us. We can also learn from it, but we want to get to a place where we've learned a lot. And if that means we have to pay a lot of karma, then that means we're not learning without accumulating and acquiring karma. So there's a way to learn without doing that. It's a lot less painful. So continuing to quote Samael and Weor here, he says, while in meditation, we can visit the heart temples of the stars, because through meditation we can achieve being completely within the intimus, the inner being. That is to say, we can completely become the magical self. We can also visit the sidereal temples in our astral bodies. Okay, so this concept of the magical self seems to be repeated in these three authors, Glahn, Huiracocha, and Samael and Weor. So continuing to study Glahn's book, just as a little side, because what we want to understand is this A-Rune. A-Rune, this is an A-Rune supplement. It's just a line, just a vertical line. And it means a lot of different things. But it can be like sort of the backbone or the phallus, even the magic wand, the staff, because of its shape. And it's also the axis that connects the earth with heaven, the celestial with the terrestrial. It connects us because we are the living A-Rune with the divine. It connects the material with the spiritual. And through understanding that as its symbolism and understanding the further depth of it, which is that it means, as Huiracocha says, the human magician. The rune means the human magician, the magical being, the willpower being, the being who is capable. The human being is a magician who knows how to manage their inner powers. The human being is a living rune. Right? We're putting these pieces together. If the only true human being is the one who's a magician, that this means to say that others are not complete, that they lack something. What they're lacking is willpower, knowing how to will. And this is the key, and all the symbols thus teach it. Real human beings, God men and God women of the A-Rune are required. We could also say that the A-Rune means upright, being upright, as it symbolizes standing straight up. So willpower is related with magic. Magic is related with the magical self, which is related with our inner being. So let's understand magic a little bit more according to this German perspective on occultism, which we studied in the previous class. Just summarizing here, or attempting to summarize today. Let's divide the existing unintentional natural force into physical and psychic ones. So he talked about the two different types of magicians. He said that the magician works with soul forces is sort of the one he prefers, and that the one that works with natural forces, he wants to divide that thing that he's calling natural force into physical and psychic. Westerners have aspired for mastery of physical forces, natural physical forces, and the Easterners, especially the highly educated peoples of South Asia, have researched the psychic ones and brought them into their power. However, Europe also has a guild of psychologists, implying psyche, right? But these researchers of the soul have, so far, only pronounced the word fraud with conviction when soul forces, which they do not know, are actuated. European scholars have always distinguished themselves in their condemnation of everything unknown to them. It's interesting, 1920. The unintentional physical forces or blind natural forces are, so now he's defining these forces, magnetism, galvanism, electricity, and all types of radiation. Even physically provable radiations are still explained by individual scholars as fraud. Now he's switching back over to soul forces. Unintentional soul forces, which the magician can control, are, among others, fear, anxiety, shock, fright, hate, faith, belief, love, despair, frustration, enthusiasm, delight. We have mentioned only the states and qualities known to everyone, whose force is proverbial. But to repeat, every quality is essential and has an agent or acting force. Scientific occultism is engaged in the investigation of these qualities and their agents. But the purposeful or consciously aimed training in order to self-master them is still far away. So what he's asking us to do is to be scientific about our investigation of esoteric and occult things. So regardless of what, as he says, European scholars say, and what psychologists say, we need to do that investigation for ourselves. No one will be able to understand mystical forces whose conceptions are not permeated with these super-scientific realizations and forces. That is, no one can train in higher forces who doubts their existence. If something doesn't exist for you, then how can you train in it? How can you study it? Because no one can control forces that are not there for them. The mysteriousness of these forces consists only in their unfamiliarity. They are nonetheless accessible to everyone. The only one who cannot control them is the one who is controlled by them. So now he's getting into the meat of it. The only one who cannot control them is the one who is controlled by them. Either you are controlled by them, or you controlled them. There is no intermediate state. He says it's black or white. You can't say you're in control if you're being controlled. It is not the domination that is difficult, but the liberation from controlled existence, from being ruled. Whosoever has made themselves free is already a monarch. A monarch. Right? Like, what did it say? Kings and queens of nature? Where was that? Here it is. King and queen and lord. The work must begin with the demons, of which I name the most powerful: lust, hatred, revenge, and all passions. If you want to be a magician, according to this German guy, 1920, then there's not an intermediate state that you can be in. We have to liberate ourselves from lust, hatred, revenge, and all passions. He says it's not domination, but liberation from a controlled existence in order to become a monarch. Right? A king and queen of nature. The work must begin with the demons, of which I name the most powerful: lust, hatred, revenge, and all passions. It is not about abstaining, but establishing one's own governance instead of being ruled. A sudden, powerful event can lift the heaviest intoxication, can turn black hair gray, or can unleash supernatural forces. The Lord of Forces can bring this about consciously at any time. And isn't it true that what can control you And isn't it true that what can control you must be intrinsic and possess force? The purpose of magic is to transform the imperfect into perfection. You shall be perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. Matthew 5:48. Chapter 5, verse 48. All right, we'll stop there. But there's plenty to review with this guy. And the point of all these German words is that there is something we're actually missing in English a lot of the time, because he's reusing words. In this case, there's two main words that came up: work or act, W-I-R-K, and another one, hair, which means like lord or king or queen, monarch. It's in a lot of words. So that tried to highlight that as well. Anyway, very interesting stuff if you're interested in other people, other cultures, how they look at things, and specifically this vein, this thread of occultism that went from Europe to the Americas during the 40s, 30s and 40s, 1930s and 40s, almost 100 years now, I guess in another, 10 years. Yeah. So with that, we'll stop the review for the moment. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. All right. So today is the A-Rune. In our numbering, we're giving it the 10th, the number 10. But just want to remind everyone that this numbering is subjective. I would say that the first 6 runes, sometimes even the first 7, are almost universally the same, regardless of the system, the country, etc. But after that, they start to change. Sometimes there's some that are, groups that go together, and then, there'll be some that'll be the same in a row and some others. But the point is that just because we're giving it the number of 10, someone else may not. The point is to study it and understand it. Fischbach, he doesn't have anything to say about this rune because the explanation isn't given for this rune, because instead of this rune, he gives another rune, the Jar rune. He gives one of these two. Probably this one. But we're not going to look at that right now. We're going to look at that in the 19th place. And we'll just move right along to Guido von List in 1907. The R rune, according to Guido von List. R, the sun in the sky, S-U-N. Fear, Aryan, eagle, and so on. And then he has the poem. I use the 10th, when through the air haunting horse riding women fly. Let me read that again. I use the 10th, when through the air haunting horse riding women fly. When I start the magic, they will begin to ride confused, in their shaping and in their striving. The R, the fear, the fire, God, the sun, the light, destroys both the spiritual as well as the physical darkness, doubt, and uncertainty. The Aryans, the sons of the sun, founded their Rita, the law, in the character of the R, whose hieroglyph is the R, the eagle. This is because the eagle sacrifices itself to itself by consecrating itself to the fear, to immolation, or death by fire, in order to be reborn. That is why the eagle was called the Fanisk and later the Phoenix, and why, as an emblematic hieroglyph, an eagle flew up from the funeral pyre of a celebrated person to indicate that the deceased, rejuvenating themselves in death, was preparing themselves for rebirth in order to strive for an even more glorious future life, despite all the repression by the Dark Ones, which forcelessly collapses before the R. Therefore, the motto he gives for this is respect the fire, or heed. Remember that we've already discussed this term, Aryan, and that it doesn't mean Aryan, and that it doesn't mean the same thing in this context. This was in 1907. If you want to read more about that, you can look at these pages, historical context specifically. All right. The A-Rune according to Ernst, Tristan, Kurtzahn, 1924. Exoterically, it means beauty. Esoterically, completion or perfection. And generally, Aryan, the R, the eagle. While in the feminine Ka-Rune, the triangle formed by the trunk and the arm points downward, thus indicating the earthly life with all its imperfections and its mostly constant torment arising from the descent into matter or into substance. Here, in the A-Rune, the tip of the triangle points upwards again. This is the triangle he's talking about. He's saying it points upwards. So the Ka and the A-Rune are kind of like 180 degrees of each other. This indicates the completed or perfected human being who will one day rise like a phoenix from the ashes of matter. When this occurs, the perfected human being or solar human being will be able to soar like an R, a royal eagle, up to their original eternal home of light, which was left in Ur times, right? The heaven or Eden of the Christianity, perhaps because of a longing for individuation and these conditioned experiences. Nevertheless, the term Aryan means nothing other than children or sons of the sun, and the A-Rune is therefore also assigned to the sun, which, for the Earth as well as for the other planets, readily embodies the Ur fire. And again, this is the interpretation that we want to understand. Everyone on this planet right now, or the great majority of human beings, regardless of the color of their skin, is considered Aryan because that's the name of the race of humanity right now. And this is something that's consistent with theosophy. And again, we studied that when we went over the historical context stuff. But R, since R means sun and fire and Ur fire, or as he's connecting here, he says the sun is the Ur fire. An eagle, that it's like saying the children or sons of the sun, S-U-N, the children of the Ur fire, the children of the eagle. That's the esoteric meaning. The magical authority of this light rune disintegrates any haunting, even by just thinking about it. Moving on to Gorsleben, 1932. The R, Or, Er, Ra rune. Letter A, number 10. A-Rune or R, eagle, the royal bird, which broods in the heights and strives upward towards the sun, the Aryan, the eagle, and the solemn image of the sons of the sun. Dr. Friedrich Teltscher's Ur word is Wandlung, meaning transmutation, as well as transformation, change, alteration, transubstantiation. A tenth one I find when female magicians fly in the air. I cause it that they are confused and stop all violence and destructive intent. R is the sun rune. R, eagle. Yan, nobleman. R, master. We saw before in the previous class, Herr meant lord or king or queen. Here, if it was Harr, it means master, but we take off the H, just Arr, he says means master. Har, the high one. Har, the high one. Haristos, the highest one, as was mentioned in the Hagal rune. Or R, in many languages, is still sun. In French, or. It does mean gold. The sun and or gold, and even in Hebrew is still Jehi or, there is light, the sun. R is the R primordial fire of the sun. And since all God worship since ancient times was worship of the light of the sun, in the name of the R, the Har in Upper Alsatian, in Upper Alsatian language, the Hern, the Lord. This way also the herd, kitchen stove or hearth, in dialect hard, was everywhere in all languages Ara, A-R-A. This way above all, also in all Nordic language. The kitchen stove was the altar. In Spanish, ara means altar. The light creator, and therefore also became the sanctuary of the giver of the creation of light, of the Gibur altar, considered the rock of Gibraltar, which means Gibur, rock or stone, al, of the, and tar, bird. The Arman. The Arman is the sun priest. The shadow image of this rune, we could see the side of the Ar-Ganger, the Ar-Walker, striding to the right towards the Recht, the right or the law of the sun, who follows the solar circle, the arc or arch. He symbolically wanders, walks, strides his destiny. The skillful Sal, S-A-L, the skillful salvation of man, who comes from the Father house and returns to God, returning again to the Father house. Thus every man who returns again to his origin, coming from the Ar, from the sun, and going to the earth, is an Arman, a sun and earth man, a light bearer, like the sun itself, which goes from rising to radiating to setting in perpetual cycles. Circling the globe, I am following the rising sun. Thus my path to the light is eternal like the sun. From the sun and the Armen, who follow its orbit, that is the Armanen, the Hermanen, the Irmin, which reminds us of the column mentioned in the A-Rune. The human being receives the law of the times, and with this is the first and only law there is. The world is a place of eternal change and wandering of a will. Let me reread it. The world is a place of eternal change and wandering of a will that works according to a plan and timing. The A-Rune is the Ar, the eagle, that flies in circles, as well as the sun above the stones of the earth, that are arranged in circles like Stonehenge, and the priest who wanders in the circle following the Ar, the yearly orbit of the sun, is the Arman, Armain, the mirror image of the orbiting universe. The cosmic man, who has the name of Adam Kadmon in Kabbalah, had also received the name of Jarman from our ancestors, the Irman, the Hirman, the Arman. Here also belongs the Hirmon, Hiram, the builder of the world in Masonic tradition, but from the Harman, the high man evolves with the Armeni, the harmony of the world, which sounds in the music of the spheres. The Arman is thus also the one who plays the Arfa, the harf or harp, the harp of the world. So Ar is this rune that we're talking about, the fire, and Fa is the beginning or initiating principle because it's the first rune, the one that begins everything. So knowing how to begin with the Ar, with the fire, with the eagle, with the sun. If R is the sun and the light, then the turning away from the sun means darkness and shadow. The rune calls upon us to pay attention to the primordial law, the primordial fire. Do not let yourself be pulled away and turned away from the light teachings and the light knowledge. Otherwise, you will irreversibly go into the darkness of all spiritual and physical baseness. The words, sentences, and images of the traditional Christian and non-Christian dogmas contain, when correctly read and interpreted, the same wisdom in a symbolic language which was kept hidden away from humanity for a long time because of baseness and ignorance. All right. Let's move on to A-Rune according to S.A. Kummer, 1932-1933. The A-Rune, R, eagle, the sun eagle, eagle man, the elder, Aryan, the Arman, the Son of the Sun. The R, the Lord. R, fire. Harmon, the high man, the sun man, or solar human being. Harmony. The numerical value 10. R, fire. The Ur fire, the primordial fire, the Son of God, S-U-N. Harmony, R-moni, R, field or farm, the farmer, the one who plows, and the caretaker, caregiver of the divine land and soil, right? The earth, the philosophical earth. R, Aryan, the Lord of the earth. R, the measurement of land, acre, or measure of earth. The A-Rune signifies streaming solar force, sunlight. It is the rune of the initiates and of guides or leaders who banish all violence. R, Arahari, the spiritual sun, the cosmos, the son or child. Ari, Ariman, Aryaman, the sun man or sun woman. R, the flying eagle. The eagle is today the heraldic animal of the sons, S-O-N, of the sun, who regain their strength through the Ur fire and become victorious. Children of the sun regain their strength through the Ur fire and become victorious, reborn, true Aryans, that is, true solar human beings. R is the rune of the light, which resolves all uncertainty and doubt. It embodies the R-Ur fire. R, the light and sun rune, that banishes all haunting and magical violence. The demonic or inverse of the R rune is the non-R, the Nar, which is fool. It means the fool in German. Non-R-ness is non-truth, folly, foolishness. The bad or terrible, the dark, the creeping opponents of light wisdom. The true position, the R rune position has the following phonetic formulas. Ara, or Ara, A, Ea, Ia, Oa, Ua. The R rune is also the rune of the healer, the curer, the doctor. Motto: Aryan, or children of the sun, attend to the R-Ur fire. The full body position that he gives, just lift out the right leg. The following position especially intensifies the practitioner's force to defeat and banish low sensual influences and demonic black magical powers. Very interesting. Facing north, the student takes the Is or Ich rune position, military at attention. After the breathing exercises, follows meditations which are directed against bad, evil, or ill influences. One then stretches the right leg sideways. Seen from the north, the following position results. One sings R, and now physically represents the R rune. Only with several repetitions of this exercise is the depth of this rune and its streaming solar force revealed to the practitioner. The R fire will penetrate into the practitioner more and more. One will grow into the true child or son of the sun. Child of the sun or son of the sun, the Aryan or solar human being. This rune position also has a special secret, and this door will open up to the pure practitioner. Additionally, the R rune position has the following phonetic formulas. Ara, Ae, Iea, A, E, A, I, A, O, A, Ua, the same ones that are given up here. And Kummer gives a hand rune position done with the right hand. The practitioner should take up the Is or Ich rune position, military at attention. This is followed by deep breathing exercises 3 times, with thoughts directed towards physical and spiritual purification. This must be observed with all the rune grips. Figure 10 shows the A-Rune grip, which is executed right-handed with the thumb bent as far down as possible. Obviously, you don't want to hurt yourself. You just want to stretch a teeny tiny bit, the thumb down just a little bit more than it would sit naturally, but not too much. Here, when singing the ah sound especially, electrical subtle forces are accumulated in the hand, causing the practitioner to feel a subtle tingling and a slight stinging or prickling in the thumb, the base of the thumb, and the middle of the hand. The outstretched fingers begin to vibrate slightly. Remember that each rune grip must be repeated 3 times for 3 minutes each, followed by a short pause in the Ich rune position between sets, since otherwise no satisfactory collection of subtle force can be reached in the hand centers. Thoughts or meditations are directed towards absorbing the R fire, the solar force. This grip has a particularly rejuvenating and strengthening effect on the life force. When it is circulated in the body by conscious willpower, a strong effect is produced in the solar plexus. The astral color is silver gray to bright light gray-green. All right. That was all the historical stuff. Looking at what the historical people had to say. So let's just see if you guys have any questions or comments. So I got a question. Are there practices to help one curb lust? It's interesting. That's what he implied here. That by doing this rune, it can help us to banish low sensual influences. But in Gnosis, we use vocalization, that is repetition of mantras, as well as pranayama and lamaseria exercises, or lamaseri. Sometimes they're called Tibetan rites, or Tibetan 5. Those exercises are really good also. And then you can do conjurations and exorcisms of the 4 elements on your body, so that you can kind of put things in order. It's interesting when we study alchemy, it talks about chaos and ordering the chaos. And when we look at the body as that element that needs to be ordered, and we try and place ourselves into a position where we can do that, then we can understand why sometimes we need to use things like exorcisms in order to correct the body, in order to order the body. But what can also be really helpful is just being really careful of the impressions that we receive. A lot of magazines, television, music encourages lust in us and highlights that. Movies, videos. And so when we don't take that in, that can help a lot, so that we don't feel that lust so strongly. But the idea is that it's an energy that we need to use. We need to transmute. We have to learn how to do that. We can't just repress it, as it said before. We have to learn how to transform it, transmute it into something else. The Gnostic and Rosicrucian section. So first we're going to look at the R or A-Rune according to Huiracocha. This was a correspondence course. He would send this to you in the mail, or you might read it together with a group in your local school, your FRA, fraternity, Rose Cross Fraternity School in Central and South America, if you were lucky enough to have found such a thing. 90 years ago when we didn't have the internet and it wasn't so easy to access esoteric subjects, and you spoke Spanish. But thank goodness it's translated in English now. But this is what you would have read. Beloved disciple. In the Nordic Kabbalah, the A-Rune signifies change, and its planetary correspondence is with the moon. The moon constantly changes, right? Yet the A-Rune is the principle of the solar force that dwells in us. The moon and the sun. R, in the primitive language, signifies sun, S-U-N. And in that same language, this rune was called Ara, which is another name by which it is known. Ara signifies altar, and specifically refers to an altar stone. Upon this altar, sacrifices are offered. It is a small stone that rests directly on the altar itself, where the chalice is deposited. In archaic languages and in ancient writing, these same prefixes, ar and ara, are noticed in many words. Remember that Jesus, the representative of the light, spoke Aramaic, the Aramaic language. The mountain where Noah's ark rested was Ararat. Ar is the original word for fire, or even better, the central fire. Arahari of the Hindus is the name of the spiritual sun. Among the Persians and their ancestors, Arta was truth, as well as order, whereas Atar was the holy fire. The word harmony comes from the same ancient Ara, from the Greek Ari. We remember Aristotle, Aristophanes. Let us also draw attention to the Argonauts, who, according to Greek legend, went on board the Argo in search of the Golden Fleece, which, without a doubt, gave rise to the Order of the Golden Fleece that was instituted by the Rosicrucian fraternity. It is also curious that the year in German is called Jar. Jar. Jar, Jarrr, Jahr. J is the being, and R is the sun. Thus, the solar being is represented by the year. The Adam Kadmon, the universal man in the primitive language, the Jarman, or man of the universal sun, Hiram, the Hiram of the Masons, the builder of the Temple of Solomon. The numeric value of R is 10, or the symbol of the God-man, which is a circle with a vertical line in the middle of it. All these indications should preoccupy the neophyte, and one should therefore think about the value of this rune, which is the primitive symbol of the light being within us, our inner being, right? Very interesting. We just studied the A-Rune in the previous class. We looked at the A-Rune supplement, and it talked about the magical self. Samael and Weor said that the magical self is our inner being, the intimus. And now he's talking about the light being, the solar being within us. The disciples should pronounce the mantra Ario, A-Ri-O, in order to prepare themselves for the ascension of the sun with the Sig rune, which is the next rune. Since R is the sun, then Ario is the child of the sun. So the mantra that he gives for this rune is to say that we're the child of the sun. Note that he did not give a body posture, at least in this letter, but we already know what the body posture is from here, from Kummer. We have already learned that in the ancient primitive language, the symbols have the forces in themselves. Symbols have forces in themselves. And by learning to manage the runes, we arrive at the source of the light at initiation. So next, we pass on to the Sig rune, the rune of victory. We'll do that in the upcoming class. Just a little note here. By turning the A-Rune 180 degrees, we get the Ka'un rune. We already talked about this. The Ka'un rune is associated with the planet Venus, and its Kabbalistic value is 6. Ka'un is also associated with sex and procreation in the material sense. But in synthesis, Huiracocha gives the word temptation and sustain for this rune, and notes that among the Hindus, Kama, a word similar to Ka'un, signifies desires and sexual union. In his synthesis, in Huiracocha's synthesis of the A-Rune, he gives the words change of fortune and changing. Thus, if we understand the A-Rune as the fire, or the central fire, the sun, the source, the being of the light being, and that Christ is the man of the sun, the Arman, and since the A-Rune is related to the Ara, or altar stone upon which sacrifices are made, then we can see that the turning or changing of Ka'un into Ar is the alchemical work. To use the cubic stone, the stone or the rock, the altar stone, the Ara, of Yesod, in order to sacrifice our defects, our desires, our egos, and to incarnate the light within ourselves. And finally here, looking at Samael and Weor, our final author for today, what he has to say about the A-Rune. It's very interesting. He gives a little story to help us understand. The A-Rune according to Samael and Weor. The A-Rune represents God within man, divinity within humanity, the divine forces acting within the human being, and the sacred altar stone, the Ara of life. One day, while meditating, Samael and Weor abandoned his dense form and penetrated into ecstasy, filled with a delectable, unutterable, and indescribable spiritual voluptuousness, and impelled by the mysterious force of longing, he arrived before the doors of a temple. The doors of the sanctuary were sealed with a great stone, which was blocking the way to the profane people. O heart, do not delay before opening the things of mystery. Open sesame, was his exclamation, and the stone opened in order for him to enter. So then, when some intruders tried to do the same, he had to grasp his flaming sword and cry with all the forces of his soul, "Get ye hence, profane and profaners." Samael and Weor had penetrated into the great temple of this Milky Way, the central sanctuary of this gigantic galaxy, the transcended church. The terror of love and law reigns within this venerated place. Only the sidereal gods can prostrate before the sacred altar stone, the Ara of that terribly divine temple. Joyfully, he advanced towards the place of prostrations and adorations. In all the blessed places of the temple there were a multitude of humble and simple persons who were coming and going, and who resembled submissive and obedient peasants. They were the bodhisattvas of the gods. They were men in the most complete sense of the word, creatures who enjoy objective knowledge, who are 100% self-conscious. Certainly nothing that could be called I, me, myself, existed within these human creatures. These men or solar human beings were completely dead. That is, they had eliminated the ego within themselves. Samael and Weor did not see within them the desire of standing out, of ascending, of climbing, until the top of the ladder, like they didn't want to climb to the top of the ladder or wanting to boast of themselves. These creatures had no interest in their existence. They only wanted absolute death, to lose themselves within their being. That is all. How happy he felt while advancing through the center of the temple towards the altar stone, the Ara. However, he confesses that he was marching arrogantly, energetically, with a triumphant step. Suddenly, one of those humble peasants was walking but blocking his way. For a moment, he tried to keep walking ahead arrogantly. But, oh God, an intuitional lightning bolt fulminated him to death. He then vividly remembered that in the remote past he had committed the same error while in the presence of this same humble peasant. That past error was clearly still present within his mind. With horror, terror, and fear, he remembered the dreadful instant in which he had been cast out of the temple, with the frightening words uttered from the sacred altar amidst lightning and thunder. While the whole of this event of the past revived within his mind in 1,000th of a second. Then he repented, stopping his arrogant and proud march. Feeling remorseful in his heart, with modesty and submission, he prostrated himself before this peasant. He kissed the man's feet while addressing him. His joy was immense when the authentic man blessed him. Samael and Weor felt as if he had been forgiven and joyfully continued towards the sacred altar. Afterwards, he returned to his physical body. Many years passed, and he could never forget that temple sealed with the sacred stone. Peter, disciple of Jesus the Christ, is the mysterious interpreter who is authorized to lift the stone which seals the sanctuary of the great mysteries. This is something mentioned in the Bible where Jesus says, Peter, you're my rock, and on this rock I will establish, or the stone, and on this stone I will establish my church. I forget if it's in Matthew. It might be in multiple New Testament books. But that's why he mentions Peter, because Peter in other languages means also stone. The original name of Peter is Patar, with its 3 radical consonants, PTR. The P reminds us of Pater, Vater, our Father who is in secret. The T is the Tau, the cross, the divine hermaphrodite, the sexual connection. The R is fundamental in the fire. It is the Egyptian Ra. It is also radical in the powerful mantra Inri. The fire is found latent within the stone, and the ancient people made the spark jump from within the living bosom of the hard flint, right? Using flint to make a fire. The chalice of the Christified mind has as its base the living stone, the sacred altar stone, the Ara. The mantram Ario prepares the Gnostic for the advent of the sacred fire. Practice. This mantra must be chanted every morning, dividing it into 3 syllables. A, Ri, O, prolonging the sound of each letter. It is advisable to work with this practice for 10 minutes daily. All right, if you wanted to study this material on downloadable documents, they're here in PDF. But with that, we're going to stop today's class. We want to open it up for questions and comments. Some questions about somebody says you must channel the lust. I would disagree with that. I don't think you need to channel the lust. We need to transmute the substance that could go into lust or into chastity, convert it into chastity. So the sexual impulse is the mover, the creator of the world, is the creator of our existence. But if we don't control it, we end up becoming the victim of it. And so that's really important to make that distinction, that we need to transmute the sexual impulse into chastity, not lust. Then we can learn to dominate that energy in ourselves so that we're not a victim of it. If you have any other questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. Won't be able to do a class next week, so it'll either be the following week or the one after that, depending on what the schedule permits. But thank you guys very much for your attention. We appreciate you joining us for this. We hope it's been helpful, and we want to wish you the best in your